Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Wisdom Wednesdays. Today I'm going to talk about a topic I'm particularly passionate about, and that is programming. There is so much crap that I see on the internet where I think to myself, are you just deliberately trying to confuse the person who's consuming your content just so they never really understand how to do this themselves? Or is that just your inability to break things down to the point where people can actually use them? So my aim of today's video is going to be to break things down simple enough where you feel like you can go away and write your own program. So some key questions to bear in mind. The first one is, do you understand the principles of training? Now, this could span several videos in itself, so I'm going to use the example of training for strength, hypertrophy and power just to keep things simple, but it's worth bearing in mind if you understand these principles, the exact exercises you pick aren't super relevant as other people might have you believe. Equally, what are you going to do to show progress? Now, don't get me wrong, before and after pictures are valid if your goal is body composition, but I like to take the qualitative aspect out of this to a certain extent. I'll explain how I'll do that a little bit later. And finally, what's your goal? Again, doesn't matter if you haven't written it down, it's not super specific, although that would be great. But if you don't have a goal, you still need to have something to show your progress so you know if you're moving in the right direction or not. So the principles of training. So this comes from the scientific principles of strength training, which even if strength training is not your goal, there are loads of key take-homes which can apply to all manner of training. So loosely speaking, training can be broken down into 4 categories. So firstly, you have the one that people often assume it has to be the best, and that's specific training. So training that specifically supports your performance. Now let me make this clear. If something is specifically supporting your performance, you are directly practicing that skill or that movement or that sport. So for example, if you are a footballer, then training that's going to specifically support performance is playing football. Now, the aspect where people go wrong is that they assume that general training cannot therefore support performance, which is in fact incorrect. Another place that people go wrong, and strength and conditioning coaches, myself included in my younger days, definitely guilty of this, is they confuse general training, so that's training that generally supports performance, where you are looking at improving physical qualities, so strength, speed, power, muscle size. Now that is second in the list of priorities in the sense that it gives you the potential to improve your performance at a given skill, but it is not improving the skill directly. Just because you have the physically strongest or most powerful athlete in the gym does not mean that they are going to be the best athlete on the field. And this is something that I've seen several times in the sense of athletes I've seen who are unbelievable in the gym, but relatively underwhelming in their sport. Thirdly, you have training that neither helps nor hinders performance. So this would be, for example, if, say, a powerlifter says, oh, I want to do a little bit of yoga. They don't take it to extreme. It's not going to help performance because they only have to perform in a limited range of motion, but equally it's not going to take away anything from performance. However, if you had a powerlifter who said, my goal is to be as strong as possible, and they're running marathons on the weekend, this is going to be training that hinders performance. And a quick word on specificity. As I said, don't confuse specificity as being just because it looks the most similar to the sport as being the most beneficial. So for example, if you're a footballer and you tweak your hamstring, you're going to be doing very general, potentially isolated hamstring work. It's not going to be football specific hamstring rehab, at least not in the early stages. Secondly, the more specific something is, the less it can be overloaded. So for example, if you have a football athlete, the most specific thing to them would be playing a match for 90 minutes. But you can't overload a match for 90 minutes to the same extent that you would be able to overload it if, say, for example, you're doing a 4v4 small-sided games for 4 minutes. You're going to see much higher heart rates in that type of scenario than what you would see over a 90-minute game. So specificity and overload are almost in complete contrast to each other. Equally, As a powerlifter, if I want to be super specific, then I'm going to do 1 rep in the squat, 1 rep in the bench, 1 rep in the deadlift. But there's not that much overload I can achieve if I'm only doing 1 repetition. Finally, specificity for non-barbell athletes. If you are not a powerlifter, then it really doesn't matter whether you use a split squat for your leg strength, a trap bar deadlift for your leg strength, or lunges for your leg strength. Doesn't matter hugely. However, if you are a competitive powerlifter, you better hope that you've got squat and full deadlifts and bench press in your program, because these are the skills you need to be practicing for your sport. If you're not a powerlifter and these movements aren't in your program, doesn't matter as long as you have some form of upper body and lower body strength covered in your program. So what will you use to show progress? So for example, if I'm doing a program and I want to get more powerful and my standing long jump is getting further, I can have it on reasonable grounds that my program is working. The reason why I like an 8 to 12 rep max for hypertrophy is because if my aim is to get my muscle size bigger and my rep max within this rep range is going up, I can be reasonably confident that my hypertrophy program is working because my body is laying down more muscle tissue, which is then allowing me to lift a heavier weight. Now, of course, if you're a rank beginner and you've literally just started, this will go up each and every week, and there may not be an increase in muscle size to accommodate this. However, if you've been training any reasonable amount of time and your 8 to 12 rep max is going up, you are probably getting bigger. And finally, strength. Unless you're a powerlifter, I don't see any reason to test your absolute 1 rep max, unless of course you want to stroke your ego for the gram. But I do think that there are several useful ways to determine whether or not an athlete is getting stronger. So estimated 1RMs, whether you're using a 1RM calculator or whether you have a means of measuring bar speed and extrapolating a 1 rep max from this, are useful tools that can avoid athletes having to really put it all on the line for a 1 rep max, which, let's face it, unless you are in a strength sport, I would argue there's not much need to risk it to that extent. Yeah, you might want to, for example, see an athlete do a 3 rep max, but maybe they leave 2 reps in the tank. That's perfectly logical. Equally, if you are a powerlifter or a non-athlete, you just enjoy training in the gym, singles at RP8, so this is a single where you could have done 2 more reps, are also good uses of training time. So if this number's trending up, I can be reasonably confident that you are getting stronger, providing, of course, that's in a compound lift, by the way. Nobody wants to do a 1RM bicep curl because that's not really showing us much. So key questions. How often do you have to train? Now, this is an interesting one because whenever I speak to people in terms of consultations and I say, look, how often have you got to train? They think that more must be better. So they're like, yeah, I can train every day. And then you're like, well, no, because if you train every single day, I'm going to have to bring the intensity and volume down so low that you never really recover from the stimulus that you've been given. So it's entirely based on how often you can train, just like how long you've got to train is entirely individualistic. Because if you can only train 15 minutes, brilliant, we'll use that 15 minutes as best we can. If, however, you have an hour, then this looks a lot different. So don't just tell your coach what you think they want to hear. It's going to be based on what is going to be the best use of your time. An excellent question I love that gets right to the heart of what's the best use of your time is, whatever your goal is, if you only had 3 15-minute sessions in order to achieve your goal, what would you be doing in those 15-minute sessions? Now, for example, if I was training for strength, I'd probably be loading up the bar for heavy squats or deadlifts. If my goal was hypertrophy, then actually in 15 minutes I can still get a pretty good session in because my rest is going to be minimal and I'm going to stress my body as much as I can in that time period. And finally, type. What resources do you have access to? If you have good coaching available to you and you've got certain equipment available to you, then excellent. If you know how to perform movements well, then by all means pick them. If you download a program off the internet and you have never heard of the movements, let me tell you now, you're going to be facing a long, hard battle trying to find out how to learn them via the internet than if you had a coach. So let's start with frequency. So now I'm going to go through how I plan my own training. So I can have 4 days of training. I know 1 day is probably going to be in the week. The 3 days are probably going to be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So that means that my one session in the week where I've not really got much time will probably be a little bit shorter, a bit of an in and out job. The 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where I've actually got more time on my hands, I might bump up the volume just a little bit. Again, 4 days training looks a little bit different to 1 day training. If you can only train 1 day a week, you can absolutely smash yourself because you've got all week to recover. Equally, on 4 days, you can either do 2 upper, 2 lower, or 4 whole body if you desire. Intensity. So if you were training for hypertrophy, which I am at the moment, the key principles are mechanical tension, so how much weight are you using, metabolic stress, so how close to failure are you going, and overall muscle damage. And if you look at my program here, I have means of measuring whether I am lifting more weight over time, so I can log the load, or equally how much work I'm getting done. So for example, if you look at week 1, week 2 and week 3, there's a slight increase in volume, but I've also got things in there which I can measure that intensity as well. So for example, 8 reps at 8 RPE, so that's an 8 repetition effort, but I could have done 10 but no more. How long do you have? So this is not just per session, but also per week as well. So if we look at this stimulus recovery adaptation curve, a training stimulus is applied, you become fatigued, so you're digging yourself a hole, then as you sleep, eat, recover, then eventually you climb out of the hole. Now, if you didn't train from there on in, you would involute, or you would actually regress in your training capabilities. Now, if you're a beginner, this curve looks a lot different, because it's going to take you longer to recover because exercises are more novel to you, and so that is another consideration when it comes to how long do you have. If you are more accustomed to training, you can train more frequently with less soreness. If you are a beginner, you might want to train less frequently, or bring down the volume or intensity to accommodate for this. Finally, type of training. I love this quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson because it fits nicely into my philosophy. When I was with GB Boxing and GB Paralympic Table Tennis on an internship, I'd constantly ask the coaches, what's this exercise good for in terms of that person's sport? And for example, I said, how's a bench press going to help a Paralympic table tennis player on the table? To which they were like, it's not, but we want him to get stronger. We're applying the principles of strength training by lifting heavy weights. So if the only resource you have is your own body weight, well, guess what? If you use 1 to 5 reps with a 7 or above rating of perceived exertion, so that's 1 to 5 reps where you only had a maximum of 3 reps in the tank, then you will get stronger. Likewise, if you've not got a gym, but you want to increase muscle size, so hypertrophy, any exercise that allows 8-ish reps with 3 or less reps in the tank, you're going to be increasing muscle size. So type of training. So what exercises can you perform well? Again, sounds obvious, but if there's a choice between 2 exercises and one of them you perform well and the other one you're not so confident in, go for the one you perform well, regardless of what the textbook tells you. In terms of exercises marrying up to the principles of training for your desired goal, you can see in my training program the volume gradually gets more, and for example, for something like the total reps on chin-ups, I know that, for example, if in week 1 it takes me 3 sets to get to 24 reps, and week 2 that takes 10 sets, then obviously there's something going on there. I like using total number of reps in stuff like dips and chin-ups, especially for myself, because they are not a competitive movement and it's very general training anyway, but it means that I still have a marker on my general pushing and pulling capacity as training's wearing on, and it also gives me an idea of whether I'm becoming more fatigued as the weeks go on. Equally, in terms of measuring progress, I know if my 8 reps at 8 RPE is going up, then I'm probably becoming more conditioned to handle heavy weights for higher reps. So thank you for listening. If you would like a training template to start filling in to get started, then by all means get in touch. One thing I would say is write yourself a program, even if it's, for example, a week program. As in something you do weekly, not a week program as in a poor one. And even if you attempt to add a little bit more weight, or maybe another set, or maybe some more reps each week, As long as there's some form of progressive overload in there, you will be increasing the stress on your muscles and getting stronger and or bigger as the week go by. Now, I appreciate this has been a whistle-stop tour, but if you have any questions, feel free to drop them below, or any feedback. Thank you very much for listening to another Wisdom Wednesday. I'm Todd Davidson. Catch you again in the next video.